No one raised a hand when the old horse was led into the auction ring. Not one. The barn was loud moments earlier, boots scraping concrete, bidders murmuring, the sharp crack of a gavel echoing off rusted beams. But the instant this horse stepped forward, the noise collapsed into an uncomfortable silence. Heads turned away. Some people shook their heads. Others stared with the kind of pity usually reserved for things already halfway gone. The horse was thin. Not starved, but worn, like time itself had taken a personal interest in him. His coat, once a deep chestnut, was dulled by dust and age. His steps were slow, deliberate, each hoof landing as if he were measuring the ground before trusting it. One ear tilted forward, the other lagging just a fraction behind, a small detail most people missed, but not everyone. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Senior gelding," he announced, voice less confident than before. "Age unknown. No guarantees." That was usually the death sentence. In this world, unknown age meant unknown problems. And unknown problems meant money no one wanted to spend on a horse who might not have much time left. Someone in the back muttered, "He won't last the winter." A few people nodded, not cruelly, just practically. This was business. Horses like this didn't have futures. They had endings. That's when Daniel noticed the ear. Daniel hadn't planned to be here. He stood near the back rail, hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, hat pulled low. He told himself he was just looking, that he couldn't afford another responsibility. Not now. Not after the last few years. Not after the debts, the quiet nights, the echoing absence of a house that once felt full. But the horse lifted his head slightly, just enough for Daniel to see his eye. It wasn't dull. It wasn't empty. It was watching. Not pleading. Not panicked. Just aware. As if the horse understood exactly where he was, and exactly what was happening. That single eye tracked the room slowly, carefully, until it landed on Daniel. And for half a second, the world narrowed to that look. Daniel felt it in his chest before he understood it in his mind. The auctioneer tried again. "We'll start low." Still nothing. A longer pause now. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that tells you something is wrong, even if no one says it out loud. This was the moment when most horses were quietly ushered back out, unsold, their fate sealed somewhere down a road no one liked to think about. Daniel swallowed. He thought of the night his barn went quiet. The empty stall that still smelled like hay and leather and memory. The promise he'd made to himself that he wouldn't get attached again. That he wouldn't make decisions with his heart. But mercy doesn't ask permission. He raised his hand. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. "We've got a bid." A ripple moved through the crowd, soft murmurs, a few raised eyebrows. Someone near Daniel leaned over. "You sure about that?" they whispered, not mocking, just confused. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes never left the horse. The gavel came down quickly. No one challenged him. No one wanted to. The price was so low it barely felt real. Less than what some people spent on tack they'd replace next season. When it was done, just like that, the old horse belonged to him. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel approached the stall where the horse had been led. Up close, the signs of age were clearer. Faint scars along the shoulder. Muscles that had once been powerful, now softened by years of work. But the horse didn't shy away. He didn't pin his ears or bare his teeth. He just stood there, breathing slow, steady. "Hey there," Daniel said quietly. The horse flicked that uneven ear again. Daniel reached out, stopping just short of touching him. He waited. He always waited. That was something he'd learned the hard way. Trust couldn't be rushed, especially when it had been broken before. Finally, the horse lowered his head an inch. Permission. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "All right," he murmured. "All right, old man. Let's get you home." The ride back was quiet. The trailer hummed beneath the tires, the road stretching long and empty ahead. Every so often, Daniel checked the mirror, half expecting the horse to panic, to fight, to prove everyone right about him being too far gone. But the horse traveled like he'd done it 100 times before. When they arrived, the barn lights flicked on, casting warm gold across familiar wooden walls. The place smelled like hay and dust and something steadier, something safe. Daniel guided the horse into a clean stall, fresh bedding beneath his hooves. The horse paused at the threshold. For a moment, Daniel worried he'd pushed too much. That the new space, the quiet, the change would overwhelm him. But then the horse stepped inside, slow and careful, and lowered his head to the straw. Daniel leaned against the stall door, exhaustion settling into his bones. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "Just rest." As he turned to leave, his foot brushed against something near the tack room door. A small, battered envelope, yellowed with age, wedged between an old trunk and the wall. It must have fallen from the paperwork the auction staff had tossed aside earlier. Daniel frowned and picked it up. Inside were folded documents. Not medical records. Not feed notes. Official papers. His brow furrowed as he scanned the first page. Then the second. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. Because the name printed at the top wasn't unfamiliar. And the bloodline listed beneath it wasn't ordinary. Daniel looked back at the old horse standing quietly in the stall, straw clinging to his mane, eye calm and observant. His heart began to pound. Whatever he'd just brought home out of mercy, whatever everyone else had walked away from, it wasn't worthless. Not even close. Daniel sat on the edge of the old tack trunk, the envelope resting in his hands like it might disappear if he blinked too hard. The barn was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder, the slow chew of hay, the soft exhale from a horse's nostrils, the distant creak of wood settling as the night cooled. Daniel unfolded the first document again, even though he'd already read it twice on the drive back to the house. Registration certificate. Bloodline records. Transfer history. He traced the name at the top with his thumb, as if the ink might explain itself if he touched it long enough. The name belonged to the horse in the stall behind him. Not a nickname. Not a guess. An official, stamped, verified name. One Daniel had heard before years ago, spoken in arenas and whispered in breeding barns. "That's not possible," he muttered. Yet there it was. According to the papers, the old horse wasn't just any senior gelding with an unknown past. He came from a line that had produced champions, horses that sold for six figures before they ever set hoof on a track or into a show ring. Horses whose offspring were insured for more money than Daniel had earned in his best year. Daniel stood slowly and walked back to the stall. The horse lifted his head, straw dangling from his mouth, and watched him with that same calm awareness. One ear tilted forward again, the other trailing behind, as if listening to two different worlds at once. "You're telling me," Daniel said quietly, "that they just forgot who you were?" The horse chewed, unconcerned. Daniel laughed once, short, disbelieving. Figures. He'd seen it before. Not with horses, but with people. How something valuable could be overlooked once it stopped shining. Once it aged. Once it didn't perform on demand anymore. He knew that kind of invisibility too well. For years, Daniel had been the guy everyone called when a horse needed fixing. Not flashy training. Not ribbons. Just patience. Understanding the ones that didn't fit neatly into expectations. And when his own life fell apart, when the accident took his riding partner, his confidence, and eventually his clients, people stopped calling. "You're good," they'd said, "but not what we need anymore." Daniel shook the memory away and focused back on the horse. "All right," he said. "Let's start at the beginning." The next morning, daylight revealed what the barn lights hadn't. The horse's scars weren't random. They were old training marks. The kind left by years of disciplined work. His teeth showed age, yes, but not neglect. His hooves were worn, but balanced. Someone had cared for him once. Deeply. Carefully. So how had he ended up at a low-end auction, mislabeled, ignored? Daniel decided to call the only person he trusted to tell him the truth. Mara arrived just after noon, her truck crunching down the gravel drive. She'd been a vet tech for 20 years and a horsewoman even longer. She took one look at the horse and stopped short. "Hold on," she said slowly. "I know that face." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You too." Mara stepped closer, peering into the stall. The horse shifted his weight but didn't move away. His breathing stayed even. curious but calm. "No way," she murmured. "I haven't seen him in a decade?" Daniel's stomach tightened. "You recognize him?" "I do," she said. "Or at least, I recognize what he used to be." She turned to Daniel, eyes wide now. "Do you have any idea what you brought home?" "I think I'm starting to," Daniel replied, handing her the papers. Mara scanned them quickly. Then more slowly. Then she sat down on the overturned bucket beside him. "Daniel," she said carefully, "these records are real." Silence stretched between them. "How much?" Daniel finally asked. Mara didn't answer right away. She looked back at the horse, at the graying muzzle, the tired joints, the ear that never quite aligned with the other. "At his peak," she said. "With this bloodline? With his performance history?" She exhaled. 3 million wouldn't have been unreasonable. Daniel closed his eyes. 3 million. He thought of the bid he'd made out of pity. The change left in his wallet. The way the auctioneer had barely looked up. The horse snorted softly as if amused. Mara stood and entered the stall, moving slow and respectful. She ran her hands gently along the horse's neck, checking muscle tone, scars, reaction. When she reached the shoulder, the horse flinched, just a little. "There it is," she said softly. Daniel stepped closer. "What?" "Old injury," Mara explained. "He compensated well. Too well. Probably pushed through it for years. Eventually, someone decided he wasn't worth maintaining." Daniel felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. Not anger, something heavier. "Can he still?" Daniel started, then stopped himself. Mara shook her head. "Not like he used to. But that doesn't mean he's done." The horse turned his head then, slowly, deliberately, until his eye met Daniel's again. And this time, there was something else there. Not just awareness. Recognition. As if he knew they were talking about him. As if he knew his story was finally being heard. Daniel reached out and rested his hand against the horse's neck. The muscles beneath his palm were warm, alive. The horse didn't pull away. "I didn't buy you to make money," Daniel said quietly. "I bought you so you wouldn't disappear." The horse leaned into the touch, just barely. Mara watched, a small smile forming. "You know," she said, "if word gets out about those papers..." Daniel shook his head. "It won't." She studied him. "You sure?" Daniel looked around the barn. The simple stalls. The quiet. The absence of pressure. He looked at the horse again, at the way he stood, dignified even in age, carrying the weight of a past no one had bothered to ask about. "He's had enough people wanting something from him," Daniel said. "For once, he gets to just be." That night, Daniel stayed in the barn longer than usual. He brushed the horse slowly, carefully, talking in a low voice about nothing and everything. About loss. About second chances. About how strange it was that sometimes the most valuable things were the ones everyone else overlooked. The horse listened. And when Daniel finally turned to leave, the old horse followed him to the stall door. Just one step. But it was enough. Because trust doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives like this, tight, hesitant, earned. And Daniel had a feeling this horse's story wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The first sign that the old horse remembered more than anyone realized came 3 days later. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden burst of speed. No heroic moment that would have made sense in a highlight reel. It was something quieter, something only a horseman who had spent years watching subtle changes would notice. Daniel was cleaning tack when he heard it. A rhythm. Not footsteps. Not pacing. A measured shift of weight. Adjust. He looked up. The horse was standing in the center of the paddock, eyes half-lidded, tail still. His front leg lifted slightly, then set down again with deliberate care. Not fidgeting. Practicing. Daniel's breath caught. He stepped closer to the fence, careful not to interrupt whatever spell the horse was under. The old gelding moved again, pivoting his hindquarters a fraction, testing balance, testing memory. It wasn't stiffness guiding him, it was precision. "That's not random," Daniel whispered. It was muscle memory. The kind that never fully leaves. The kind forged in years of repetition, of cues given and answered, of partnership built through thousands of small, perfect movements. Whatever this horse had done in his past, it had required discipline, control, intelligence. And he still remembered. Daniel didn't rush it. He leaned against the fence and let the moment pass. When the horse finally stopped and lifted his head, their eyes met again. The ear tilted forward. The familiar one. "You were somebody," Daniel said softly. "Weren't you?" The horse snorted as if offended by the understatement. That afternoon, Daniel brought out a simple lead rope. Nothing fancy. No saddle. No bridle. Just an invitation. The horse eyed it, ears flicking back and forth now, uncertainty replacing calm. His body tensed, weight shifting backward. Daniel stopped where he was. "It's okay," he said. "We're not going anywhere." Minutes passed. The wind moved through the trees. A bird landed on the fence rail and hopped away. Slowly, the horse took one step forward. Then another. Until the rope hung loose between them, untouched, unnecessary. Daniel clipped it on gently. The horse flinched, but didn't pull away. "That's it," Daniel murmured. "I've got you." They walked the paddock together, side by side, not leading, not following. Just moving. Daniel felt the horse relax with each step, tension draining from his shoulders. When Daniel stopped, the horse stopped. When Daniel turned, the horse turned. Mara watched from the gate, arms crossed, astonishment written all over her face. "Daniel," she called out, "that's not normal." He smiled without looking at her. "No," he said. "It's trained." That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the papers spread out again. He'd avoided reading too deeply into them before, afraid of what he'd find. Afraid of the responsibility that came with knowing. Now he wanted answers. He traced the performance records, dates jumping out at him. Major venues. Big events. Long gaps between entries. Then suddenly, nothing. A clean break. No retirement notice. No injury report. Just gone. One note caught his eye. Scribbled in the margin, barely legible. Transferred under special circumstances. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "What happened to you?" he asked the empty room. The next morning brought the answer. A dusty pickup rolled into the drive just after sunrise. Daniel didn't recognize it. A man stepped out slowly, older than Daniel by at least 20 years, his posture stiff, his eyes sharp despite the years etched around them. He took one look at the paddock and froze. The old horse lifted his head. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the man removed his hat. "Well," he said hoarsely, "I'll be damned." Daniel approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man nodded toward the horse. "That one," he said. "Where did you get him?" Daniel studied the stranger's face. There was no greed there. No calculation. Just something heavy. Regret, maybe. Or recognition. "An auction," Daniel replied. "Why?" The man swallowed. "Because I used to ride him." Silence fell like a dropped rain. The horse took a step forward, nostrils flaring. His ears pricked, both of them now, perfectly aligned for the first time since Daniel had known him. And then something incredible happened. The horse lowered his head. Not submissively. Not fearfully. Respectfully. Daniel's chest tightened. "You remember me," the man whispered. He approached slowly, hand outstretched. The horse didn't retreat. Didn't flinch. He breathed in the man's scent and let out a long, shuddering exhale, like a sigh held for years. The man turned to Daniel, eyes wet. "He was the best horse I ever had," he said. "And I failed him." Over coffee, the story spilled out in fragments. The horse had been everything. A once-in-a-generation talent. But success brought pressure. Sponsors. Deadlines. Performances demanded when the horse wasn't ready. The injury came quietly. A strain. Then another. The man had wanted to stop. Others hadn't. They said rest would cost too much, he said. That there were younger horses coming up. Cheaper ones. So the horse was sold. Used. Passed along. Until his name meant nothing and his papers were lost in the shuffle. "I tried to find him," the man said, staring into his cup. "By the time I did, he was already gone." Daniel listened, anger and understanding tangling together inside him. "You don't want him back?" Daniel said carefully. The man shook his head. "No. I came to make sure he was alive." He looked out the window at the paddock, where the horse stood quietly in the sun. "And to thank you for giving him peace." That afternoon, Daniel brought the horse into the arena. Just walking. Just breathing. He placed a hand on the horse's neck and gave the softest cue he could manage, one he wasn't even sure would mean anything anymore. The horse responded instantly. Perfectly. Mara gasped from the rail. Daniel felt tears blur his vision. Because some bonds don't break. They just wait. And the old horse, written off as worthless, had been waiting a very long time. Word has a way of traveling, even when you don't invite it. Daniel didn't tell anyone about the papers. He didn't post photos. He didn't make calls. But barns talk. Trucks come and go. And a senior horse that suddenly moves with quiet precision has a way of stirring curiosity among people who know what they're looking at. Within a week, the questions started. A farrier lingered longer than usual. A feed supplier asked casual questions that weren't casual at all. One afternoon, a black SUV pulled up near the gate and didn't leave right away. Daniel noticed everything. He also noticed the horse noticing. The old gelding had become more alert lately, not anxious, but aware. His ears moved more freely now, tracking sounds with intention. His posture had changed too. He stood taller, weight more evenly distributed, as if shedding years not from his body, but from his spirit. Trust does that. But trust can also be fragile. That afternoon, Daniel led the horse into the arena just as the SUV door opened. A man in a pressed jacket stepped out, phone in hand, eyes already scanning the property like he was measuring it. The horse stopped. His head lifted. Muscles tightened. Daniel felt it instantly through the lead rope. "It's okay," Daniel said softly, though he wasn't sure it was. The man approached the fence. "Beautiful animal," he called out. "Mind if I ask where you found him?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He rested a hand against the horse's neck, feeling the familiar warmth, the steady but faster than usual heartbeat beneath his palm. "He's not for sale," Daniel said finally. The man smiled politely. "Everything's for sale." The horse tossed his head once, sharp and sudden. Daniel shortened the rope slightly, not to restrain, but to reassure. "I said," Daniel repeated, voice firmer now, "he's not for sale." The man sighed, like someone humoring a child. "You may not realize what you have. I do. And I can make this very easy for you." Daniel met his gaze. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." The SUV left a few minutes later, gravel spitting under its tires. The silence it left behind felt heavier than the engine noise. Daniel led the horse back to his stall. The gelding didn't resist, but his calm hadn't fully returned. He shifted restlessly, ears flicking back toward the road. That night, Daniel sat on the stall floor, back against the wall, just breathing with him. "You don't have to go anywhere," Daniel whispered. "I promise." But promises are easy to make in the quiet. They're harder when reality shows up with numbers attached. 2 days later, Mara called. "Daniel," she said without preamble, "I heard from someone. There's interest. Serious interest." Daniel closed his eyes. "How serious?" "Enough that they're talking about legal ownership. Enough that those papers matter." Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't buy him for this." "I know," Mara said gently, "but this isn't just about money anymore. It's about history. About rights." That night, Daniel barely slept. He thought about the bills stacked on his desk, the repairs the barn needed, the years he'd spent barely holding on. $3 million could erase all of it. More than erase it. It could rebuild everything he'd lost, and then some. He walked out to the barn before sunrise. The horse lifted his head as Daniel entered, ears forward, eyes soft. He stepped closer to the stall door on his own, closing the distance. Daniel rested his forehead against the horse's neck. "They want you," Daniel said quietly. "For what you were. Not for who you are." The horse breathed out slowly, warm air ghosting across Daniel's collarbone. Daniel imagined handing him over. A pristine facility. Perfect footing. Endless assessments. People touching him not with patience, but with expectation, measuring every step against a memory of greatness. He imagined the old injury flaring again, the trust unraveling. Something inside Daniel settled then, heavy but clear. In the days that followed, the pressure increased. Calls, messages, an official-looking letter delivered in a stiff envelope. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle horse bought for nothing. Daniel answered none of them. Instead, he focused on the routine. Morning feed, gentle turnout, short, careful sessions in the arena. Nothing that asked too much. Just enough to remind the horse of what he could do, and that he didn't have to prove anything. The horse blossomed under it. He began nickering softly when Daniel approached. He followed him without a lead in the paddock, matching his steps like a shadow. Once, when Daniel stumbled on uneven ground, the horse shifted closer, steady as a wall. Mara watched it all quietly. "You know," she said one afternoon, "there are people who would call this irresponsible." Daniel smiled faintly. "They usually do. And you're okay with that?" Daniel looked at the horse, now half asleep in the sun, tail swaying lazily. "I spent years chasing what people thought I should be," he said. "It nearly broke me. I'm not doing that to him." The final offer came in writing. It was more money than Daniel had ever seen on a single page. Immediate. No strings, they said. Daniel folded the letter once. Then again. Then set it down on the tack trunk. That evening, he brought a chair into the barn and sat with the horse until the light faded. "I don't know how long we'll have," Daniel said quietly, "but I know how I want you to spend it." The horse leaned into him, slow and certain. Outside, the world waited, loud, impatient, hungry for legends. Inside the barn, an old horse slept peacefully, finally safe from being valuable. And Daniel knew his answer. The letter stayed on the tack trunk for 3 days. Daniel didn't tear it up. He didn't frame it either. It just sat there, folded clean and sharp, like a question waiting to be answered. Every time he passed it, he felt the weight of what it represented: security, relief, a way out of years of quiet struggle. $3 million. A number big enough to change a life, but not big enough to buy peace. On the 4th morning, Daniel made his choice. He didn't call the number on the letter. Instead, he loaded the horse into the trailer and drove before sunrise, the sky just beginning to pale at the edges. The road was empty, stretching forward like it always had, uncertain but open. The horse traveled calmly as he always did. No pawing. No panic. Just steady breathing and trust. They arrived at a small, overlooked facility tucked into the hills. Nothing flashy. No banners. No crowds. Just open pasture, soft footing, and quiet hands. A place where retired horses lived out their days not as relics, but as teachers. Daniel signed the final papers there. Not sale papers. Transfer papers. The kind that ensured the horse would never be owned for profit again. When he stepped back from the desk, his hands shook, not with regret, but with release. The caretaker walked him out to the pasture where the horse stood, ears pricked, waiting. "You're sure?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "He's already given enough." When Daniel opened the trailer, the horse hesitated at the ramp. For a heartbeat, Daniel wondered if he'd misjudged things, if this change, even a good one, was too much. Then the old gelding stepped down. He didn't rush. He didn't freeze. He walked forward, lifted his head, and breathed in the open air like it was a gift. Daniel unclipped the halter. For a moment, neither moved. Then the horse turned back. He took one step toward Daniel. Then another. He pressed his forehead gently against Daniel's chest, the way he had in the barn, the way he always did when he was saying something words couldn't carry. Daniel closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. The horse lingered, then turned and walked toward the pasture, where other horses grazed lazily in the morning sun. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Weeks passed. Daniel returned to his barn, quieter than before, but lighter. The bills were still there. The repairs still needed doing. But something had shifted. The pressure he'd carried for years had loosened its grip. People asked questions. Rumors circulated. Some praised him. Others called him a fool. He didn't argue with any of them. One afternoon, a package arrived. Inside was a single photograph. The old horse stood in the pasture, coat gleaming in the sun, head high, ears forward, both of them. No tension. No expectation. Just presence. On the back, in careful handwriting, were 4 words. He finally looks free. Daniel pinned the photo above the stall where the horse had once stood. That stall didn't stay empty for long. A few months later, another horse arrived, this one younger, rougher, eyes sharp with distrust. The kind everyone else said wasn't worth the effort. Daniel smiled when he heard that. He moved slow. He waited. He listened. Because he'd learned something important from an old horse bought out of mercy. Value isn't in papers. It isn't in price tags. It isn't in what the world can take from you. It's in what you choose not to. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances matter, that kindness sometimes carries more weight than money, take a moment to share it. Someone out there might need the reminder. Subscribe if you believe some legends don't belong in arenas, but in quiet pastures, where they can finally rest. Because in the end, the horse wasn't worth $3 million. He was worth far more than that.